I stood there in my black dress, still smelling like church incense and stale lilies, when Carol pointed her wine glass at me and said, "Now that your husband has died, painfully mourn, pack your things and never come back here again, not ever." My hand froze on the staircase banister. Not because I didn't expect venom from her, but because she said it in front of the entire family. Her husband, my brother-in-law, nodded slowly beside her. My niece sipped champagne like it was a toast. And my grandson looked away. They were all in on it. The house I had lived in for 17 years. The garden I planted with my husband's hands in mine. The bedroom where I nursed him until his final breath. All of it, apparently, no longer belonged to me. I was now an intruder in my own home. Let me take you back a few days before the funeral so you understand how I ended up erased from the life I helped build. The house was too quiet. Not peaceful, quiet in a way that made your skin itch. As if someone had walked out of a room and never came back, and their absence left the walls confused. I stood by the bay window, still in my funeral clothes, holding the same cup of tea I had reheated twice but never drank. Outside, the garden Glenn and I had built together was untouched. The white roses we planted during our first year in this home were in bloom. He always said they'd outlive him. He was right. The front door opened. I didn't need to turn. I knew the sound of her heels before I even saw her. Carol, my late husband's sister. Always dressed like she had somewhere more important to be. Always with that look like the room didn't deserve her presence. She breezed in, removed her sunglasses slowly like she was peeling off a mask, and looked straight at me. "Linda," she said with a syrupy tone. "Still here?" I didn't answer. Just placed the tea on the windowsill and faced her. "Is that a question or a statement?" She laughed once. No joy in it. Just air and judgment. Then came the others. Mark, Glenn's younger brother. Still chewing gum at age 55 like he was stuck in high school. Emily, Carol's daughter, already rolling her eyes. I hadn't even said a word to her, but I could tell she was itching to post something cruel online the moment she left. And then there was Julian, my grandson. My sweet Julian, just 15, standing there behind the adults like a prisoner among his captors. His eyes caught mine, then shifted away. That hurt more than Carol's words ever could. I had invited them for a simple post-funeral gathering. One final toast to Glenn. Closure. At least that was my plan. But they came with another. Carol raised her glass, swirling the wine like she owned the room. "Now that your husband has passed on," she began, her voice clear and cold, "mourn, pack your things and never come back here again." First I thought I misheard her. Maybe it was grief twisting my ears. But no. She meant every word. And the others? Not a single one spoke up. My throat tightened. "Excuse me." Carol stepped closer as if I were hard of hearing. "This house belongs to the Kane family. You were married in. Not born in. And now that Glenn's gone. Well, what exactly are you still doing here?" The room didn't spin, but it shifted. Like gravity had betrayed me. "I lived here for 17 years, I said, my voice steady. "I cared for him when none of you visited. I held his hand when he slipped into that coma. I buried him with dignity. Don't stand here and tell me." "You buried him with our money," Mark cut in, arms crossed. "The Kane estate paid for that coffin. That plot. That suit. You even used our lawyer for the will." Emily scoffed, her lip gloss glinting under the chandelier. "You're acting like this is your castle, Linda. It's not. It never was. My dad said Glenn was supposed to transfer ownership of the house back to the family before he died. He didn't." Carol's eyes narrowed. "Are you sure about that?" I looked toward the mantel. Glenn's ashes rested in a black marble urn, surrounded by his favorite photographs. One of me, one of Julian when he was a baby, and one from the first garden we planted together. "I'm not leaving," I said calmly. Carol's smile vanished. "You will," she whispered, walking past me slowly. "You'll leave because we're giving you 1 week. 7 days. And then the locks will be changed." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Grief hadn't even had time to settle in my bones, and already I was being erased. Like I was some temporary nurse instead of a wife. A woman who had loved Glenn through the worst of his illness. Who held him when he wept. Who gave up her own family to be with him. "I have nowhere to go," I said without shame. "Not our problem," Emily muttered. That was the final nail. I didn't cry. I didn't collapse. I simply walked to the kitchen, poured myself that now cold tea, and sat at the table where Glenn and I used to play cards every night before he got too sick. Julian followed me in a moment later. Quietly. Like he'd snuck away from the enemy camp. "I'm sorry," he whispered, eyes full of guilt. "I didn't know they were gonna say all that." I looked at him. "My only real family left. You didn't speak up." He looked down at his sneakers. "I was scared." I nodded. I understood. Fear makes cowards of people. Even the good ones. "Where will you go?" he asked, his voice small. "I don't know yet," I admitted. He reached into his pocket and placed something on the table. It was Glenn's old compass. The one he used when we'd take road trips when he swore the GPS was lying. He said real directions came from the heart. "I found it in his drawer," Julian said. "He would have wanted you to have it." My chest tightened. It was the only act of kindness I'd seen all day. That night, after everyone had left, I sat alone in the bedroom, staring at the ceiling fan slowly spinning overhead. The silence screamed. The space next to me was too big. The closet smelled like his aftershave, but even that was starting to fade. Grief is strange. It doesn't knock. It barges in, takes your breath, and rearranges everything. And now I had 7 days to leave the only place that ever felt like home. The next morning I woke to silence again. Except this time it wasn't peaceful or even strange. It was sharp, like the house was holding its breath, waiting for me to be gone. I sat up in bed slowly, still dressed in the long black funeral gown from the day before. It clung to me like a shadow I couldn't peel off. My husband was gone. My family, if you could call them that, had thrown me out of my own home. And the only person who'd looked at me with any kindness was a teenage boy who hadn't even known what to say. I walked into the kitchen barefoot. The tiles were cold. Glenn used to joke about getting heated flooring. "Next winter," he always said. "Next winter we'll do it." There was no next winter now. I stood at the sink, staring into the garden as I sipped weak coffee. I didn't add sugar. What was the point? The white roses outside were drooping just slightly. Too much heat and not enough rain. They needed care. But what about me? I hadn't even begun to process the loss of my husband, and now I was expected to pack boxes, sort papers, and somehow figure out where to live. With no will, no savings of my own, no job, no children of my own to call for help. All I had were memories. And apparently they weren't welcome here. A knock at the door startled me. I opened it and found Mark standing there with a clipboard in one hand and a smirk in the other. "Morning," he said. "Just wanted to drop off the inventory form." I blinked. "The what?" He held up the clipboard. "The inventory. For the stuff you're taking. Carol thought it would be good to keep things organized. You know, so there's no confusion about what belongs to the Kane family." My heart dropped. "The Kane family?" I said slowly. Mark shrugged. "Look, I don't want trouble, Linda. But Glenn never legally transferred ownership of this house to you. You were married, yes, but the deed still has his name alone. And as his blood relatives, we have every right." "To erase me?" I interrupted. He looked uncomfortable. "No one's erasing you. We're just reclaiming family assets. After 17 years, you think I'm just a squatter? A guest?" I took the clipboard from him and stared at the blank lines. "I made this house a home." He didn't answer. "And Glenn," I added. He would have been disgusted by this. Mark hesitated. "Glenn's not here." That shut me up. He left. I shut the door, but I didn't move. I stood there, breathing, shaking. They were turning my grief into a transaction. Turning my marriage into a technicality. I wanted to scream. Instead, I started packing. By noon, the guest room was full of boxes. Every item I touched seemed to pull a string inside me. Glenn's reading glasses. Our wedding photo. His favorite mug. The one with a chip on the rim. I wrapped it carefully in newspaper as if it were gold. I packed slowly, trying to make sense of what my life had become. The house echoed as I moved, the air heavier with every drawer I emptied. At one point, I opened the closet in our bedroom and found his old flannel shirt. The blue one. He always wore it when he was cold, even in summer. I pressed it to my face and finally broke. The sob came out like a cough, unexpected and messy. I dropped to the floor, still holding the shirt, and cried into the carpet until my throat was raw. This was more than losing a husband. It was losing identity, safety, history, everything. Later that evening I tried to make a few phone calls. I rang Glenn's lawyer first. Mr. Holloway. Linda, he said, his voice tired. I'm sorry. I wish Glenn had finalized things. He meant to. But well, time ran out. There's nothing. I asked. His will was incomplete. No signature. And no recorded transfer of the property. That's why the Kane family can take everything. I'm sorry, he repeated. He wasn't cruel. Just helpless. And so was I. I called a friend from church next. Janine. Oh honey, she whispered. That's awful. I wish I could take you in, but our son just moved back in with his kids and we don't have the space. I understand, I said, though my voice trembled. You could try the local shelter, she added gently. That's when it hit me. I wasn't a widow with a home and a garden anymore. I was a woman with a suitcase, a few boxes, and nowhere to go. 2 days passed. The Kane family didn't return, but the silence felt worse than their presence. Like the house was holding its breath again, waiting for me to vanish. On the 3rd day, Julian showed up alone. He stood on the porch, clutching a small envelope. I had to sneak away, he said quickly. Mom doesn't know. I opened the door wide. Come in. He walked in like the floor might explode beneath him. They're serious, he said, his voice low. Mom's already called a locksmith. Mark's calling movers. They're gonna show up this weekend. I sat down. I have 4 days left then. Julian handed me the envelope. I found this behind Dad's old records in the garage. I think he meant to give it to you. I opened it carefully. Inside was a letter, in Glenn's handwriting. Shaky, uneven, but his. Read. Linda. I'm sorry I waited too long to make it official. I thought we had time. I always think we have time. But if you're reading this, then I've failed you. You were never just my wife. You were my anchor, my peace, my second chance at life. This house was never a Kane family home. It became ours the day you moved in. If they try to take it from you, fight if you can. But if it's too much, walk away with your dignity. Because you were the heart of this place. And they can never take that. Love you forever. Glenn. I couldn't breathe. I held the paper close like it would keep me from falling apart again. Julian was watching me. He loved you. I know. I hate what they're doing. I know. I'll help you pack, he said quietly. I nodded. Not yet. Let me sit with this for a while. He understood. Sometimes, silence is the only language grief speaks. That night I slept on the couch. Couldn't bring myself to lie in that bed again. At around 3 a.m. I heard movement outside. I peeked through the curtains and saw a shadow at the garden gate. It was Carol. She was walking along the rose bushes, flashlight in hand, snapping photos. I opened the window just enough to hear her whisper into her phone. Yes, the property's still intact. Front lawn's good. Rose beds look mature. No vandalism. Then I heard her say, get a realtor ready. We list it next week. My blood went cold. They weren't just taking the house. They were selling it, quickly, quietly, before anyone could stop them. Before I could stop them. That night I didn't cry. I made a decision. If I was going to leave, I would not leave quietly. They wanted to erase me. They were about to learn that I was far more than a grieving widow. I was the woman Glenn loved until his last breath. And now I had nothing left to lose. I woke up with a different kind of ache in my chest. Not grief this time. Not fear either. It was something else. A kind of calm, bitter clarity that comes after too much crying and too little justice. The kind of ache that told me I had just 4 days to save what little I had left of the life I built with Glenn, or walk away with my head held high. Either way, I refused to be erased in silence. The sun was rising. I stood at the kitchen sink again, this time holding a pen and notebook. I wrote down every item I intended to take, not because I wanted their permission, but because I needed to keep my dignity neat and accounted for. Glenn's compass. The blue flannel shirt. Our wedding album. The black and white picture of him holding my hand at the beach. And one rose bush from the back garden. If they wanted to burn the rest of this place down, I wouldn't stop them. But they wouldn't take everything. That afternoon I called in a favor. Clara, I said, voice cracking slightly. It's Linda. Claire was an old friend from my first job. We hadn't talked in years. Life, husbands, and miles had stretched us apart. But I knew she still lived just outside town, and if anyone had a warm heart and a strong opinion about injustice, it was her. Linda, she gasped. Lord have mercy, how long has it been? Are you okay? No, I said simply. I need a place to land for a few days. I'll explain everything when I get there. Without hesitation she said, I've got a guest room and a fridge full of wine. Come tonight. I smiled, tears threatening again. You always were the generous one. She laughed. You always were the stubborn one. I didn't tell her how true that was about to become. Packing that evening felt different. Purposeful. No longer like I was being kicked out, but like I was choosing to step into something unknown. I boxed the photos carefully. Wrapped the mug in 2 layers of newspaper. I clipped one perfect bloom from the rose bush and pressed it inside Glenn's favorite poetry book. Then I opened the top drawer of his nightstand and found something I hadn't noticed before. A small velvet pouch. Inside was a locket. Silver. Oval-shaped. And when I opened it, it had 2 tiny photos. One of me smiling at a Christmas party years ago, and one of Julian as a toddler holding a plastic toy boat. I sank onto the bed. He carried us with him. He never told me. And now all I could do was carry it forward. Carol arrived unannounced the next morning. Of course she did. She wore beige slacks and a cream blouse like she was headed to a PTA meeting, not a family betrayal. Her smile was tight. Professional. I see you've started, she said, glancing at the boxes by the door. I have. She walked through the living room like she owned it. Her fingers trailed across the edge of the bookshelf. Nice to see you being reasonable. I'm not, I said plainly. She turned. Excuse me. I'm not being reasonable. I'm being calm. There's a difference. She blinked. I know you've called a realtor, I added. She froze. How? You forget, Carol. This is still my house for now. My ears still work. And you're not as stealthy as you think. Carol's face hardened. You can't stop what's coming. Glenn didn't leave anything official. This property's under Kane Trust and you were, what did the lawyer say? A legal spouse with no documented rights. You've done your homework. She smiled coldly. It's not personal, Linda. It's just property. I stepped closer. This was a marriage. This was a life. You think you can reduce it to square footage and silverware. If it's not in writing, she said, shrugging, it doesn't exist. That was when I realized she didn't care what I felt. She didn't even care about Glenn, not really. This was about control. About legacy. About appearances. She didn't want the house. She wanted the last word. You have 3 days, she reminded me, already turning for the door. I didn't speak. She paused at the threshold. Julian's been quiet lately, she said over her shoulder. You wouldn't happen to be dragging him into this mess, would you? I gave her a look that made her stop talking. Don't use him as a weapon, I said, calm but stern. He's a child. Not your pawn. She left without another word. That night Julian came again. This time with a duffel bag and a baseball cap pulled low over his face. Grandma, he said, I want to stay the night. Your mother will kill me. She thinks I'm at Nathan's. Still, if she finds out. I don't care. I sighed. Why? Because I can't stand being in that house, he said, voice shaking. All they talk about is the listing price and how fast they can get rid of the ghost. That's what Aunt Carol called it. The ghost. Tears welled in my eyes. He dropped his bag by the couch. Can I sleep here? One last time. I nodded. Of course, sweetheart. He didn't ask for a pillow. Just curled up in the throw blanket Glenn used every night. I sat beside him until he fell asleep. Then I walked into the study, opened the drawer of our shared desk, and found the tiny silver key Glenn had once told me to keep just in case. It opened a box I hadn't touched in years. Inside were folders. Photos. Receipts. Letters. And one very old document. A handwritten agreement between Glenn and the Kane family, before I even met him, stating that any property he purchased after age 50 would be his alone, unless otherwise shared. This house was bought at 52. I stared at the document for a long time. It wasn't a will, but it was something. The next day I made copies. I mailed one to Holloway, one to myself, one to a friend, and I slipped one in the mailbox of Carol's lawyer. I didn't say anything, didn't call, didn't text, just waited. 2 days remained. Julian had to go back. He hugged me tightly, whispering that he'd come back again if he could. After he left, I walked around the house slowly, saying goodbye with my eyes. The wallpaper Glenn had picked. The cabinet door he could never get to close properly. The floorboard that creaked even after it was nailed down twice. I didn't know if I was leaving forever. But if I did, I'd carry every inch of this house with me. Not in boxes, but in memory. Morning light crept across the living room floor in long golden stripes. I sat on the edge of the couch, drinking from Glenn's chipped mug and listening to the clock tick. 2 days. That was all the time I had left in the house. Or so they thought. I'd spent the night thinking, planning, praying. And sometime between the silence and the sunrise, I realized something. I wasn't just grieving anymore. I was watching myself be erased, with permission. But I was done being polite. At 9:13 a.m. the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Carol's lawyer standing on my porch in a pressed gray suit, holding a padded envelope. He greeted me like a hotel concierge. Mrs. Kane. Widow Kane, I corrected. He cleared his throat. Of course. I'm just here to formally deliver a second notice of vacancy. As discussed, the Kane estate requests the property be fully vacated by Friday at 12 p.m. sharp. You'll find documentation inside the envelope detailing the expectations of the transfer. I didn't blink. Do you want a cup of coffee? He looked confused. No. Thank you. I took the envelope and gently shut the door in his face. No slamming. Just quiet finality. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. Instead, I went into the study and opened the drawer again. The document I'd found, the one that showed Glenn had exclusive post-50 ownership of any property purchased, sat inside a folder I'd labeled in thick black ink. Let them try. That afternoon I received a call from Holloway, the lawyer. Linda, he said, sounding more energized than usual. I received the copy. That document might not be a will, but it's significant. Especially if the Kane family signed it years ago, which they did. And it was notarized. I thought so. There's a legal opening here. If we act fast. How fast? Well, it won't stop them from trying, but if you're willing to push back legally. I am. He paused. You've changed, Linda. No, I said. I've remembered who I am. I spent the evening putting the house in order. Not because I was leaving, but because I wanted it to reflect Glenn's memory, not their greed. I opened all the windows. Let fresh air sweep through the halls. Put fresh roses in the vases. Dusted the mantel. Laid out Glenn's favorite photo of us from the lake trip. My hair windblown, his arm around my shoulder, both of us laughing like children. I wanted this house to smell like life again. Not loss. Later that night, Julian called me. They're furious, he whispered. Mom found out about the document. Carol says you're bluffing. I smiled into the phone. Good. Are you safe? Safer than ever. There was a pause. Grandma, I know this has been hell. But I've never seen you like this. Like what? Strong. Like you were born to push back. I leaned back into Glenn's old armchair. Maybe I was. I just forgot for a while. The next morning, one day before their deadline, Carol showed up herself. She didn't knock. She banged. I opened the door calmly. Her jaw was clenched. You think you're clever? No, I said. I think I'm prepared. She barged in, uninvited, pacing like a storm cloud. That document changes nothing. You're a widow without a legal will. You have no job, no children. Glenn didn't leave you anything. You have nothing. I have the truth, I replied. She scoffed. Oh please. That paper is old. Who's even going to listen to you? My lawyer. The notary who signed it. A judge if necessary. He stopped pacing. You're not going to win. I stepped toward her. It's not about winning. It's about not being walked on. You don't get to take my husband and my home just because you didn't like how he lived his life. Carol's face twisted. He was my brother. And I was his wife. That hit her. You always hated me, I said gently. From the moment Glenn introduced us. You thought I wasn't good enough. That I was less. I never knew why. Her arms folded. Because you weren't one of us. No, I agreed. I was better. Her mouth opened. But she had no comeback. Leave, Carol. This isn't over. It is. Unless you want me to bring this to court and let your precious family name become a headline. Your choice. She stared at me for one long breath, then turned and walked out without a word. The door clicked shut behind her. And just like that, for the first time since Glenn died, I breathed. That evening, Julian returned. He ran in, grinning. She's livid. You should have seen her face. I laughed. She'll recover. I hope not. He helped me set up the guest room, the one I once used for friends and cousins. Now it would be mine, at least until the legal process unfolded. This house feels different, he said. Because I took it back. He looked around the room. Can I ask you something? Anything. What was Grandpa like before he got sick? I smiled, eyes soft. He was stubborn. He liked jazz at sunrise. He hated mushrooms. He used to write poetry but never showed anyone. Really? I nodded. He wrote one for me once. Slid it under my pillow on our first anniversary. Do you still have it? I walked to the desk, pulled open a drawer and handed him a folded paper yellowed at the corners. He read it quietly, his eyes glassy. He really loved you. He did. And now so did Julian. At midnight I stepped outside into the garden. The air was still. The house glowed behind me like something alive. Not a structure. Not bricks and walls. But home. I walked along the rose bushes, touched the petals and whispered. I stayed. As I had. Not just in this house but in myself. For too long I'd let others decide my worth. I'd let silence replace boundaries, let politeness be mistaken for weakness. But not anymore. This house was built on love. It would not be taken by spite. And even if I had to fight harder in the weeks ahead, I knew this much. I wasn't going anywhere. Not because of a document, but because Glenn chose me. And I was finally choosing myself. The next morning felt different. The walls didn't feel like they were caving in anymore. The air wasn't thick with dread. And for the first time in weeks, I slept without waking in the middle of the night gasping for breath or reaching for a hand that was no longer beside me. But peace has a short shelf life when you're dealing with people like the Kane family. At 8:17 a.m., a black car pulled up in front of the house. I was already dressed. I'd made a habit of preparing early now. Emotionally, legally, even spiritually. I wore one of Glenn's old flannel shirts over a clean pair of jeans. I didn't bother with makeup. I didn't need war paint. I was the war. I opened the door just as the knock landed. Carol wasn't alone this time. Behind her stood a tall man in a navy blazer and thick-rimmed glasses. He looked like someone who was paid to smile but trained to bite. Linda, she said, voice flat. This is Henry Black. He's the Kane family's official estate counsel now. He has a few things to clarify with you. I leaned against the door frame. Let me guess, he's here to tell me that the document Glenn left doesn't count. Henry stepped forward smoothly. Actually, Mrs. Kane, I'm here to resolve this issue quietly and fairly. Fairly, I repeated. That's a new word in your camp. Carol cut in. We don't want this dragging into court. It's embarrassing for everyone. No, I said. It's only embarrassing for you. I've got nothing to hide. Henry cleared his throat. The Kane family is willing to offer a small financial settlement in exchange for you vacating the property within the next 72 hours. I didn't respond right away. I just looked at him, then at Carol. How much? I asked. 20,000. I laughed once. That wouldn't cover half of what I sacrificed in this house. It's generous, Carol snapped. You're not even part of the Kane bloodline. I folded my arms. You keep saying that like it means something. Glenn chose me. He stayed with me. You're the ones who drifted away, remember? Henry remained calm. We're simply trying to avoid a legal back and forth that could take months. Then maybe you shouldn't have started one, I said, stepping aside to reveal a thick envelope resting on the hallway table. This is a formal petition from my lawyer. It cites the original deed clause, the notarized agreement, and all supporting documents. It's being filed with the county court today. Carol's mouth fell open. You're serious? As a heart attack, I replied. Henry blinked. You're contesting full ownership? I'm claiming what should have never been threatened. For once, neither of them had a word to say. Now if you'll excuse me, I added, I have roses to water. I shut the door slowly. Not a slam. Just enough pressure to say, this conversation is over. Later that day I sat with Clara on her front porch. She lived just 20 minutes away, but the way she hugged me when I arrived felt like a sister I hadn't seen in years. She poured us sweet tea and we watched the wind stir the trees. "You always had that fire in you," she said, smiling into her glass. "You just forgot how to use it." "I didn't forget," I sighed. "I just got tired." She nodded. "It happens when you love people who don't know how to love you back." I stared at the condensation on my glass. Clara reached over and held my hand. "You're doing the right thing. It's not about the house. It's about reclaiming what they tried to strip from you." "My name." "Exactly." That evening I returned home to find Julian waiting on the steps, fiddling with the drawstrings on his hoodie. "Hey," he said softly. "Hey yourself." He looked nervous. "They told me I can't come here anymore." I sat beside him. "Your mom." He nodded. "She said if I visit you again I'll be grounded for a month." "That's not fair." He shrugged. "Nothing about this is." I squeezed his hand. "I'm sorry you're in the middle of this." "I don't care," he said, eyes wet. "You're the only one who talks to me like I matter." My throat tightened. "Can I leave something with you?" he asked. "Of course." He reached into his backpack and pulled out a photo. It was from Glenn's last birthday. Julian had baked a crooked cake and I was standing behind Glenn, arms wrapped around his chest while he laughed. "I want you to have it," Julian said. "I made a copy for myself." I smiled through tears. "Thank you." He stood up. "They won't win, Grandma. You're tougher than all of them combined." He hugged me tightly before walking off into the dusk. I stood there for a long time after he left, staring at the picture. They may have tried to isolate me, but I wasn't alone. The next morning I opened the mailbox and found a letter from the county court. My claim had been accepted for review. I also received a second letter, this one from Henry Black. In neat print it said, "Pending further legal proceedings, no sale of the property shall be finalized or advanced by the Kane estate. A temporary hold has been filed." I sat on the porch swing and exhaled. It wasn't a win. Not yet. But it was the first sign that the ground beneath me had stopped shifting. That evening I walked into the backyard and trimmed the rose bushes. I could almost feel Glenn beside me, humming low, nodding in approval. I whispered to him as the sun began to set. I didn't fold. I didn't run. I stood. And I knew he was smiling. The Kane family's silence didn't last. 2 mornings after the court issued the hold on the property, Carol showed up again. No lawyer this time. No blazer. Just fury. She stood at my doorstep wearing oversized sunglasses and a red blouse that looked like it had been ironed with rage. She didn't knock. She just opened the screen door and shouted through it. "You are humiliating this family." I was in the kitchen buttering toast. I didn't rush. When I finally stepped outside, I didn't offer her a chair or a cup of tea. I simply leaned against the doorframe and waited for her to speak like a civil person. She didn't. "You've dragged us into court," she snapped. "You've poisoned Julian against us. You've made me look like a monster in front of neighbors who once sent me holiday cards." "You did that on your own," I replied calmly. "I only told the truth." "You think Glenn would have wanted this circus?" I stepped forward slowly. "He would have wanted me safe. Respected. He would have wanted you to honor his memory, not rush to sell the home he died in." "You think you're better than us?" she hissed. "No," I said, meeting her glare. "I know I was better for him." She flinched. "I was there in the real moments," I continued. "The hard ones." I wiped his mouth when he was too weak to eat. I sang to him when he forgot how to speak. I didn't run from the pain. I stayed. She didn't speak. "You haven't earned this house, Carol. You only want it because you hate that I was the one he chose." Her chin trembled just slightly. "Leave now," I said softly, "before I say things that can't be unsaid." She opened her mouth, then shut it. And this time she walked away slower. Not defeated, but no longer in charge. The court date arrived 2 weeks later. I wore the same black dress I'd worn to Glenn's funeral. Less because of grief, more because it had become my armor. I sat in the small courthouse with Holloway beside me, my hands steady in my lap. Across the aisle, Carol sat stiffly next to Henry Black. Her lips were pressed so tightly together they were almost white. The judge reviewed the documents. The notarized agreement. The title history. The written testimony from Holloway. And even Glenn's unsigned will, which though not enforceable matched the sentiment of everything else. I've reviewed both sides, the judge said, finally looking up. And while this is an emotionally charged case, the law speaks clearly. The property was purchased solely by Mr. Glenn Kane after the age of 52, which, per the agreement signed by the Kane family, makes him sole owner. That agreement is valid and binding. Carol's head dropped. Furthermore, the judge continued, Mrs. Linda Kane has proven continuous residence and marital contribution. She may not have a paper deed, but she has legal claim under marital property precedent and survivorship acknowledgement. My throat tightened. This court rules in favor of Mrs. Linda Kane. She retains full and sole right to the property in question. The gavel struck like thunder. Henry scribbled something into his briefcase. Carol sat frozen. I exhaled. Not in triumph. Not in smugness. But in relief. Outside the courthouse, Clara waited with open arms. I hugged her like we'd known each other since birth. Julian stood a few feet away, holding a small flower pot. He walked over and held it out to me. Inside was a single white rose cutting, clipped from the bush Glenn had planted for me years ago. I saved it, Julian said. Thought maybe you'd want to grow a new one. Somewhere else. Or right beside the old. Tears stung my eyes. I hugged him tightly, and for once he didn't pull away. You didn't just keep a house, he whispered in my ear. You kept yourself. Weeks passed. The Kane family stopped contacting me. No more letters. No more surprise visits. No more legal threats. They moved on to whatever business needed their attention next. Probably planning some new estate investment. Something profitable. Something distant. But I stayed. I stayed in the house where Glenn and I built our life. I stayed in the garden where our memories bloomed. I stayed in the kitchen where we used to dance in our socks after dinner. But more importantly, I stayed in myself. One quiet Sunday I stood by the front door holding a hammer and a small brass plaque. I placed it just below the doorbell. Etched on it in simple serif letters it read, The Kane Home. Glenn and Linda. Tea and love never for sale. I stepped back and looked at it. Glenn would have chuckled at the dramatics. But I knew he'd be proud. I wasn't the woman they once dismissed as just the second wife. I wasn't the extra in the Kane family story. I was the woman who held a man's heart till his last breath. The woman who buried him with her hands. And the woman who stood when everyone else told her to pack and disappear. That night I cooked Glenn's favorite meal, roast chicken with rosemary, mashed potatoes and sautéed green beans. I set 2 plates. Not because I expected him to walk in, but because part of him never left. After dinner I sat on the porch with a cup of tea. Julian rode up on his bike. He didn't say anything. Just dropped his backpack, sat on the porch swing and rested his head on my shoulder. Want to talk? I asked. He shook his head. Just want to sit. So we did. No battles. No courts. No noise. Just wind in the trees, the soft hum of crickets and the peace I'd earned. The Kane family had tried to strip me down to nothing. They wanted me silent. Grateful. Gone. But I had stood. No. Every creaking floorboard, every framed photograph, every sunrise through that bay window. It whispered back. You are still here. You still matter. Your name is still on the door.